I've had many writing tips thrown at me in my time. There are a lot of shitty ones. Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be talking about bad writing tips and why they're bad. Hopefully this won't be too long because I have feelings, and hopefully I can cut those feelings down to bite-sized chunks, but we'll see. These are in no particular order, on how bad or how good they are. I wrote out the first 10 that came to mind, and here they are. Bad writing tip number 1. Write what you know. This bothers me on several levels because you don't know everything when you start out writing, especially when you're beginning to write. When you're a novice writer, the first instinct that you have is to copy, and that's fine because you're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't, so you try to emulate things that work. That's fine. It's just not fine to just always do that. So if you write what you know, you're essentially copying other people. When you write fantasy, you don't know everything about your fantastical world. You have to build it, you have to imagine it. And if you just write what you know, you're taking all the creativity out of that. Furthermore, if you wrote what you knew, you wouldn't write very much because our experiences as one, individual in a 7 billion plus populated world is very small. So if you want to write about someone of the opposite gender or of a gender that, is somewhere in between, or if you want to write about someone who is not of a similar background of you, just a different country generally that you're from, who speaks a different language and worships a different god or gods or goddesses or not, you can't know all these things. You have to research. That's why we do research. That's why we're encouraged to do research. You have to do that in order to write your book that has, the greatest potential. You can't write what you know. That's just impossible. You write a truth, you research the rest. Number 2, all things, all people, all characters must be relatable. Fucking hate this word. I hate relatable. Relatability is overrated because if everything was relatable, if every character was relatable, then we would have a standard set of characters and everyone would love them. That's bullshit. Your characters don't have to be relatable. They have to be real. They have to feel real. They have to be believable. That's really more of the word that we're looking for but don't ever say. You can have an unreliable narrator. You can even have a very unlikable narrator. But as long as they're believable, people will be fine with that. Even if they do feel very strongly about their character, if you're the type of reader that needs a relatable character or a relatable main character, then you're looking for a very particular type of book. That doesn't mean that all books have to be like that. In fact, a lot of times our villains are just completely unrelatable because they are completely outside of our sphere, where we don't think like them as readers. If we can believe them, if they are very believable villains, then we're fine with that. They don't have to be relatable to us. Same thing with the world, the religion, the clothing, the technology. Like a lot of the techie sci-fi has things that, we don't have in our real world. They're not going to be relatable. The problems that they face because of the new technology or, the problems that they can solve because of the new technology are just they're not relatable to us because we don't have those things in our real lives. If they're written correctly and written with enough detail, we can believe them. Number 3 is never compare yourself to others and don't copy. This is a 2-parter because I believe so long as you understand that you're comparing yourself to get better and you want to push yourself to get better, you should compare yourself to others. I am never going to be a James Joyce. That's not my writing style, but I want to be as good a writer as I can. So who's in and around my writing level? This person, this person, this person. Okay, what did they write? How did they write it? How can I learn from, their successes and their mistakes? Why are we encouraged to read so much? It's because we're supposed to be comparing our own work to that of a published author. That's the whole point. And same thing with copying. I tried out this little bit of a time loop concept in one of my short stories, And I took that straight from Neil Gaiman, the way that it was written, because I wanted to know how saying the same things over and over, a couple paragraphs apart, would work, and would it confuse the reader. And when I gave it to my professor, she was like, I don't understand what you're doing here. And then I explained it to her, and she's like, okay, this is what you did wrong. And we worked on it, because I was trying to do something that I had seen. I was trying to emulate that. It didn't work exactly the way when I wrote it as compared to Neil Gaiman. And there were reasons for that. But I had to learn, and I had to copy that at first in order to see what didn't work with my style of writing. Straight copying and then trying to, pass off that copied work as your own is terrible. You should never do that. But if you're doing it for the purposes of getting better and trying to work out why certain techniques work and why certain techniques don't, it is an invaluable tool. You can't say, no, never do that. Just write straight from your imagination and always do this and never try to get better. That's dumb. Try to be the best writer that you can, no matter how you end up doing it. All right. Number 4, blank is the most important thing. Whatever blank is, they're wrong. Every book is different, every character is different, every story is different, every character arc, every setting, every writing style is different. You can never say that X, whatever X is the most important thing to a story. It's part of the reason why story writing and teaching story writing is so difficult, is because there's no one right answer. What is your purpose? What do you want to emphasize? And how are you doing it? All these things have to be working in harmony. If you don't have that harmony, then whatever X is might be really important to your story, but X might also be really, really detrimental to your story. You do have to have certain elements, again, so that things can work in harmony. I a lot of times compare it to music. So if you want to have a chord, you have to have a series of notes. If you change up that chord, it still sounds beautiful. If you go from a C chord to a D chord, you're still playing a chord and it still sounds beautiful. It's just a different emphasis, it's a different note. That doesn't make it any less great. It's just different. And this is also going into number 5, which is X is the best way to write. This is the reason why we have genres, we have subgenres, we have different age categories, we have different styles of writing. Everything is different. So long as you understand your audience, who you're writing to, what the demographic is, it's not a bad way to write. Some things work, some things don't. It just means you have to sort of change it up and figure it out for yourself. Your voice is different because it's your voice. It's not my voice. It's not your favorite author's voice. It's not even your least favorite author's voice. It's your voice, which means that there's no way that I can tell you how to speak. I can teach you words, I can teach you techniques, I can try to show you what works for me, or what works for them, or what hasn't worked for all of us. But if those things that didn't work for me work for you, I should not be telling you to not do that. Number 6 is one that stings my heart a little bit, and that is to never use adverbs, particularly the adverb very. I agree that you should try to never use adverbs. I love adverbs. They make sure that I am saying exactly what I want to say in the connotation that I want to say it. However, I will fully admit that there are many times when I could use a stronger verb instead of using the adverb or just saying very. However, a lot of times I want to say very. So I'm going to say very. And you should too. If you want, as a writing exercise, to not use adverbs, that's great. It's something that will improve your writing. And again, you should do that. But sometimes you just need to use the word coolly to describe something. It works. It works with the rhythm of the sentence or the paragraph, or the way that the music works with that word in conjunction with the other words are just better. Everything depends on what you're writing. So long as you're not overusing them, you're fine. Number 7, vary your punctuation. I don't understand why people hate periods so much. Not the menstrual cycle period, but the full stop, as I was taught to say. But the full stop is wonderful. It's standard. It doesn't need any flair. Sometimes you don't need an exclamation point. And for heaven's sake, stop trying to use a comma or a semicolon in order to not use a period. Let the sentence be what it's going to be. If it's not a period, if it's not a full stop, if you're using a lot of colons, semicolons, exclamation marks, question marks, you might want to rethink what you're doing and how you're saying it, because a lot of times those things elongate and make run-on sentences rather than, varying punctuation. Don't be afraid of the full stop. Most of your sentences should end with a period. If the sentence warrants something other than a period, go for it. Absolutely. I'm not saying don't ever use a comma or a semicolon or a question mark. Please use those. Just don't be afraid to not use them. Number 8 is something that I was taught to do in my master's program, and that is your story needs to break your genre somehow, or it needs to break convention. This is horrible advice, because if you break convention too much, or if you break the genre too much, nobody's going to want to publish your book, and not a lot of people are going to want to read it. It's great if you want to have an artsy book, if you want to make a commentary on the genre itself. If that is what you want to do, go for it. But if you want to work neatly in the lines of genre, that's perfectly fine. Truly and honestly, you don't need to break anything. You simply need to stand out. Sometimes breaking convention and breaking all the stereotypes is the way to do it, but not always. Sometimes you just need one really strong character or set of characters in order to do it. You need to have a new setting, a new way of thinking, a new message that you're bringing to the genre. The reason why The Hunger Games blew up when we had a pretty dystopian genre to begin with was because the message was different. It wasn't so much that the media was there and brainwashing people or, was telling lies. It was that they were actively fighting against the media or using it to their own advantage. It was putting stresses on places that weren't stressed before within the genre. And that was breaking genre, sure. But the rest of it was very neat. So please, if you've ever been given that advice and don't feel comfortable or don't want to break convention or break the genre, don't. It doesn't need to. Bring your own voice, bring your take on the genre to the story. Number 9 is something that I think that we've all been told not to do, and that is write when you're inspired. If you only wrote when you were inspired, you'd never get anything done. That's not to say to write when you're down or write when it's you just can't. There are plenty of days where I sit down at the computer and I want to, with all of my might I want to, but for one reason or another, I can't get more than a few words down. That means that for me, that day was not a good writing day. And I shouldn't write. I should start to look at, taking care of myself, have a cup of tea and watch an episode of a weird new Netflix show, because heaven knows there's so many of them right now. Some days you just can't write. That doesn't mean that you need to make all the days you can't write. You should have sort of a writing schedule. I try to write several times a week, if not every day. And when I have that, then those days that I can't write, I don't feel so bad. I don't feel guilty because I'm consistent. But you can't just write when you feel great and everything is going to go your way and you're going to get, 1,000 words done today, because you'll never get anything done. Number 10, finally at the end, the longer your story is, or the longer your sentence, or the longer your paragraph, longer in general, is necessarily better. It's not. I think we've all heard the shortest, saddest story in the world is For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn, or something like that. And it is a full, complete story through pure implication. War and Peace is also a great story. The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire is huge. And these are classics, and a lot of people really like them. I haven't read either one of them, but, we all know these as gigantic books. They're equally as good. Some would argue that the Hemingway story, or I think it was Hemingway that did that, the 6-word story is so much better. It all depends on what you're writing, how you're writing it. Let things be as long as they need to be. Sentence length should vary. Without that varying, everything sort of sounds the same. I can't remember who did it, but this is a 5-word sentence. This is another 5-word sentence. And you read it in your head, and it's just boring, that paragraph. And then you go to the next paragraph and it goes on, and the sentence length varies, and some are short and some are long. And finally, when we get to the end, it's just this beautifully composed paragraph that doesn't have to have a subject, verb, object. Your sentences don't always have to have X amount of words or X amount of words. Let your sentences and your paragraphs and your chapters and your novels, novellas, short stories, whatever, poetry, whatever length they need to be, let them be that. If you are trying to hit a word count, that's a great guideline, but not necessarily what you need to do. There is such a thing as too long, especially when we're talking about trying to get traditionally published. Unless you've been published many times before, it's really hard to get away with that. That being said, if your novel needs to be 100,000 words because it needs to be that long, let it be. Find some beta readers, find some critique partners to see if it really does need to be that long. Same thing with the other way around. If you're trying to write something very, very short, if I try to make something fit in 10 pages and it really can't fit in 10 pages or less, then maybe you need to reconsider. It's a bigger story, but it all depends. Everything is so dependent on what you're writing and how you're writing it. TLDR, it depends. So thank you so much for watching this video. Please leave a comment below your worst writing tips that you've ever been given. And if you disagree with any of the ones that I have said, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell below if you haven't already, to see more content sort of like this, but probably better. And I will see you in the next video. All right, bye.